Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. And Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well.
Good.
Doing well.
Good.
So we'll get back to work again, trying to persuade a few people to come to their senses.
Yeah, that's not
One
easy.
at a time.
One
person at a time. Madness goes as in crowds, but returning to sensibility and saneness goes one at a time.
One at a time.
So I hope we reach more than one person today.
I hope so. A couple more than that.
But there's lots to talk about today. But I thought we'd start off with, this whole thing of tracing,
Contact tracing, yeah.
and following and tracking people. Of course, my immediate reaction was tracking. Tracking is something that dictators do. We don't live in a dictatorship. But we're having a hard time convincing our friends that we don't live in a dictatorship, because we're certainly using a lot of tools. I think the only saving grace for us so far has frequently been that governments are so inept, incapable of achieving what they're supposed to be doing, and the programs fail. Like the welfare system fails, and the wars, they always lose. But again, that can be a negative too, because that just gives them an incentive to do it more.
Yeah.
If 5,000 people couldn't track people in Houston, we'll get 10,000 people to track everybody in Houston. They just add on to it. And I'm thinking about Houston because Houston hasn't been such a good example on trying to resist the authoritarians coming in and
Yeah.
tracking. So we have a county judge up in Houston that's determined to impose these things. It sounds like she's on Bill Gates' payroll.
Yeah.
This is the gate position. Tracking people. It's all for their health. To take care, make sure people don't get sick and stop the disease. But I do think it has something to do with health. It's the health of the state. And how do you protect the health of the state? According to Randolph Bourne, is you have to start a war. War is the health of the state, and certainly, when the real wars start, they lie through their teeth. And the further along you go, whether it was Vietnam or the Middle East, the further along the wars go, the more they have to lie.
Yeah.
And the people still, unfortunately, are persuaded by that until it's finally sometimes too late. But now it's the war against the virus, and they use those terms. They like the term war.
Yeah.
And now, if they get a vaccine, they want the military to come along and inject you.
Great.
Do you think that's intimidating? And what is the penalty if you don't take the shots and all this? So I hope our side hurries up and reaches a lot more people, because we report, on a daily basis of so many people that are standing up and saying enough is enough. I get incensed, really, when I think that they show these pictures of almost a patriotic zeal about a stadium that is empty.
Yeah.
And you can't even watch a baseball game. Yeah. Where are their brains? What do they care about? And yet the people are standing up, and I think they're probably torn too. Because most Americans have been taught to believe in law and order and respect, and you don't take on your government. But when will you feel responsibility on challenging the government with their authoritarian approach to all our lives? And this war on the coronavirus and is just out of control. And this tracking, though, is something else. I guess they know what kind of scientific instruments they're going to use, and they have to have a lot of technology for this. But it's all done for humanitarian reasons. It couldn't be done for the special interests of a few people. For humanitarian reasons, all wars are fought for humanitarian reasons, and that, of course, is just a lie. And hopefully, some of their failures that we can expose could make people skeptical. We have to get this disconnect, because if you do a flat-out question to the people in this country about trusting government comes out very poor. 60-something%, sometimes up to 70%. They don't believe what the government tells them, and yet they seem to roll over when they're scared.
Yeah.
That's how they can reverse that. Scare, build up the fear, and listen to the bureaucrats, and listen to the Faucis of the world and the Bill Gateses of the world, and then blame Trump for everything. he needs blame for some things,
Some
but,
things,
but
yeah.
not everything,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So it is a shame, but this whole thing about tracking everybody is just, beyond the pale.
It's very dangerous. Think of it as a national ID on steroids. And they're loving it. Lena Hidalgo, you mentioned the judge in Harris County, she says she's going to have an army of contact tracers that are being hired. Guess where they're getting the money? The CARES Act, right? The Disaster Act. They're going to hire all these people who are out of work. They're out of work because of their stupid policies of shutting down the country. Here's what Lena says. The goal is to isolate those people who have been exposed to the disease to contain the spread of the virus. So this is what it's all about. It's about going door to door. It's about forcing you to get tested. Oh, it's voluntary, but you can't go out of your house if you don't. Forcing you to get tested, and then force you to tell them everyone you've had contact with, and they will go to those people who you've had contact with and get information on who they've had contact with, and then they can tell you have to quarantine, you have to isolate. And one of the goals, this is according to the CDC's own website, is to go in daily, ultimately, and check up on people and find out if they're still quarantined, find out if they're still hiding. And sadly enough, Governor Abbott, he's not on our good list lately. He's done some okay things in the past, but he had a press conference yesterday that was very weak. You can open your bar to 25% capacity, and you got to wait another week. A lot of crazy things, and it's really weak. But another thing that he's done, he's spending a third of $1 billion hiring this company MTX Group to grow and manage a large fleet of contact tracers. 27-month contract, right? They're here for the long haul. 2-year contract, 4,000 tracers going around Texas. They're going to have hired by the end of May. They want to trace down your close contacts of those people who are infected, monitor them, and quarantine them if necessary. All of this in the context of an outbreak of a virus that, as a lot of people who weren't hysterical predicted, is going to come and go like all viruses. We actually, if we can just look at those first couple of slides, because this is daily new deaths in the U.S. Just follow that curve. The virus is reaching the end of its shelf life, as they always do. Now let's take a look at Texas. It's a little more complicated, but here's Texas. New deaths in Texas. You can still see that same arc, the same curve. They say, oh, no, we're doing this because the second wave is coming. It'll be worse than the first. That's possible because they forced everyone to stay inside and not develop their immunities. But at the same time, the same people who were saying, we got to trace everyone because of second wave, these are the same people, Dr. Paul, who got everything so wrong in the first place. Millions will die. Run for the hills. We got to shut everything down. So why should we trust these same people who messed everything up to now tell us we have to do this?
Of course, there was a recent study just came out that verifies that the number of deaths are way overcounted, which we've been arguing from the very beginning, because of the way they measure them and the unethical approach to signing a death certificate. No matter what, if they walk into the emergency room and they're just hanging on by a thread to life, it looks like he could have. They don't even have to test him anymore, just to put that down there and make those numbers go up.
Yeah.
What has impressed me up until this point is all the places that have been raided. There's an awful lot of policemen out there, and that's what they've been doing. But of course, what is proposed now by Abbott is hiring a lot more people. But they already have had a lot of police. They should be reducing the number of people because there shouldn't be as many raids on churches, things like that. They should not have to do that. But at the same time, they're having the police do this policing of nonviolent people just believing that they have the right to assemble, like they have the right to their constitutional positions. At the same time, they're releasing some of the most vicious criminals. They release the criminals, and they maybe should be watching them. And how many stories have we heard where they've been released and arrested within minutes or committed another crime, and they get released again because you wouldn't have to ask them, to have bail or anything like that. You just let them go. But the police aren't there for that purpose. Release the bad guys. Don't police them. The police, and this frequently made this point with 9/11. You know, we had to deal with the enemy, and we had to pass this law. So we had the Patriot Act. And who's the enemy? It turned out to be American people, still the American people. And this is again what we're doing now. It's the American people who are being surveilled and treated this way. And evidently, they believe that the average American person that likes liberty has caused all this problem. And the other thing that I hope to keep reading about all the past episodes, even 100 years. How many times we've had endemics a lot worse than this, and they weren't even in the news hardly, and nobody remembers them. In my lifetime, they're popping up. You know, I don't remember that. 1975, and also in 57 and 98 even. There was a lot of flu deaths, more than we have now. But no, this and to make it's pretty amazing to me that they were able to orchestrate this in a worldwide fashion. You know, and that's why they needed international organization like CDC and
WHO.
WHO. Otherwise, because in the past it was never, the really, really bad epidemics were because people knew it. But this is not what we're looking at. We're looking at something that is much less than a lot of the epidemics we had before, when people didn't have to put up with the real enemy. Turns out to be our own government.
Yeah. And you mentioned the previous epidemics we've had, the previous pandemics. I think it was Jeff Tucker, but someone like Jeff Tucker did a piece recently saying we had 100,000 people died in a big pandemic in 1969. That was the year they held Woodstock, where all these 100,000 kids were out all together doing God knows what. But so this is what happened in the previous. But the other thing about the contact tracers, this is the thing that really is pretty disgusting. It does remind you a little bit of the post 9/11 era, where we did lose a lot of jobs because of the panic over the terrorist attack. The economy was tanked for quite a while. So what did they do? They created Homeland Security, and they created the TSA. So they hired a lot of people whose livelihoods have been destroyed to go ahead and do all kinds of things at the airport to us. Of course, they never caught a terrorist. They can't catch terrorists, but they can sure mess us up. It's the same thing is happening now. There are thousands and thousands of people put out of work here in Texas, thanks to people like Governor Abbott, who shut everything down without thinking twice. And now they're getting pretty restless. And so he's going to hire them to go around like the Stasi, snooping on people. Let me have some of your blood. We need to test you. Somehow, Dr. Paul, I monitor some of the groups out there, the Texas groups. Texas people aren't going to take very kindly to having someone knock on their door saying, we need some of your blood. You need to swab you. And it's not going to end well.
So you have faith and confidence the Texas people are going to wake up.
The real Texans,
they're real Texans. But the other thing about this tracking is identification, doing what they're doing, and knowing and having an identification where they can tell whether we go in our house, out our house, down the street, or whatever. That's what they want. But they suggest that one of the consequences likely will be is why are they doing this? Well, to dictate to them to where you can go and to who you can socialize with. So if so-and-so is a suspect that might have someday had a positive test or something, you cannot go there, and they have to have a list like that. And then I think it was one of the governors or something that certainly wasn't on our side. But it's always done in the name of good health.
Yeah.
We care about the people's health. That's the only reason they want to put restrictions on us and not let anybody watch a baseball game again.
Yeah.
Because we want to protect their health. It's not happening. There's some serious complications from this shutdown that we haven't heard yet. A lot of people are suffering, mentally, physically, socially. It's all a consequence of this overkill, which is trying to disappear. It looks like it's going to go away. And they're working on this vaccine, and the vaccine may be ready by the end of the year. What they're going to do is they're going to get it ready. It reminds me of 1976. Hurry up, and just give them a vaccine. It has, even if it doesn't work, just give them a vaccine. Until the election's over or something. That to me is criminal.
And even Fauci said it might not. Not only might it not work, it may actually make the virus stronger. Thanks a lot. But you mentioned this is something that was on Zero Hedge a few days ago. This idea of creating social bubbles, which would be a creation of a small group of people that you're allowed to associate with, and they will use smartphone apps to track and trace people who violate. So you have maybe 10 people that you're okay to be with, you can have over your house, what have you. And if you violate that, they come down on you. And this is how they're using technology to create kind of a virtual gulag. But there was a Bloomberg report today, which is really important and really fascinating. And basically, it negates everything we've talked about so far. There was a Korean Center for Disease Control study. They studied 285 survivors of COVID-19. They had the disease, symptomatic survivors of it, and they tested positive after recovering. Because remember, the big scare is you're going to get it again. We got to trace everyone and track everyone because you could get it again. Well, what they found is something very different. That after recovery, even if you test positive, you're not infectious. The only thing that these survivors are doing is they're shedding dead virus. So it really undermines and negates everything that they're trying to do, but they're desperate to use this as an excuse to clamp down.
They're hoping to get this vaccine real soon, maybe by the end of the year, after the pandemic is disappeared. But they will still want to vaccinate people and make plans for the next one. That doesn't bother them. Oh, yeah, if it's good for March. But we want to protect you from this ever happening again. And at the initial distribution of the vaccine is a big job. They had to close the system down, and some people had higher priorities to protect their liberties. And I see Walmart, I think, made billions of dollars in the lockdown.
Yeah.
And how many shops have we seen go broke just around here? So if they closed things down for political reasons and protected some of the powerful interests, what about the vaccine or the stamp of approval? So that will be political too. They can't vaccinate everybody at one time. So that will be political, and that will be certain people that they want to protect and give that stamp of approval. But my prediction is Fauci is not going to take a vaccination. He is not going to do it. So all those individuals ought to stand up. Anybody who's involved in giving somebody else a vaccination, they ought to show their papers that they really believe in this stuff. And that would be a lot of politicians too.
And I worry about it because Trump said, well, there may be some people who may not want to take the vaccine, which that's kind of an ambiguous, because if the military comes at your door, and they want to give you a vaccine, it's going to be tough. There's a couple of other quick topics we wanted to touch on, and one of them, because we want to keep covering the kind of resistance, these really fascinating battles in states where there are areas that are resisting the tyranny of really evil governors. We have the next clip here. This is something interesting that's happening in Oregon. My brother lives in Oregon, and he's in lockdown. And so Governor Kate Brown said, you know what, I want to go ahead and extend the lockdown through July. And keep that up through July. And there were a group of churches that said, you can't do that. The law says you can only do this for 28 days without permission from the legislature. She said, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. They took her to court. And out in eastern Oregon, Dr. Paul, is pretty conservative out there.
Right.
A lot of ranchers. And there was a local judge out there that ruled in their favor that she did not have the authority. Well, she had a panic attack, and she immediately went to the state Supreme Court. We have the next slide, and this is, I think, just happened today. They temporarily reinstated her restrictions, but the battle isn't over. The battle is going on, and we talked about Wisconsin had a similar thing. There are other things going on in North Carolina. The court overruled the governor restricting people's ability to go to church. So it's happening everywhere. They're using the courts. They're suing, they're undermining these dictatorial governors, and so that's kind of a good news story.
Yeah, it is, and when we see the resistance building, this is the only thing that can really save us from this thing just really snowballing, and we're moving in the wrong direction. It's hard to reverse things. Once it happened, what are the odds of, if I were in Congress again, heaven forbid, and I introduced a bill to get rid of the TSA like I used to, who cares? Oh, well, no, we have to be safe. And all that. Now they don't even have an airplane to fly, even if they're willing to go through the lines, one step after another. So this is a big turning point where we are. And if we don't have a lot more people saying, I have rights, I'm an individual, I have First Amendment rights. When I finished my last tour of duty and tried to describe the situation, actually I placed the First Amendment rights above the rest, not that you do deny the Second and all the other amendment, but I thought if you can't speak out and like it's getting more difficult now because we've mixed some of these private social networks with the government, and they are the censors now.
Yeah.
And have you noticed that? I'm not supposed to ask you questions. Have you noticed when on our websites, different websites, and you say, "Oh, I think I'll look at that video," all of a sudden
Taken
something
down.
disappeared.
Yeah,
You know, so that's why I keep hoping all those smart libertarian computer people will devise something that will provide us the service of YouTube.
No censorship, not doing the role of the state. Well, you touched on this earlier, Dr. Paul, and it's worth bringing up again. Here's another trend that we're watching closely. And we both saw an article in the Illinois Review, I think it was of today, where Illinois is dramatically overcounting the coronavirus, the COVID-19 deaths. It's also happening in Michigan. Medical examiners are upset. They're using the wrong definition. They're following what Dr. Birx said, quote, if someone dies with COVID-19, we're counting it as a COVID-19 death. And that's not accurate, and it's not appropriate. And we've actually, I don't think we've put this up before, but this last one, I think, this is what happened in Colorado. 25% too high because they started differentiating between dying with COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19. So if you can extrapolate 25% overcount to the rest of the country, still obviously a terrible flu season, but why are they trying to elevate these numbers so desperately?
You have to have an enemy. Have to have an enemy
Not
out
the
there.
science, yeah.
Oh, this is not too much in science, but this is a real problem because of these numbers. What if we could assume that next year the total? They said it's going to. Well, they had millions before, but they say, well, it looks like we'll end up with 116,000 deaths. I think it was in this country in that was 1968, I believe. But what if these estimates turn out that at the end, next 6 to 8 months from now, the deaths are 1/2 of what they're telling us.
Yeah.
And there's really, all they do is they go back and they say, well, you're supposed to diagnose something. How many autopsies were done? Oh, we don't do autopsies. How many of these patients had other drugs? We don't do that either. How many people were actually cultured? How many people were tested positive? You'll find out that there's nothing like this. So it has to be a scare tactic. It's being used. It's the same type of operation that the warmongers do when they want to go to war around the world. And believe me, as we speak, some of that activity is going on now. People have to be prepared. The Chinese are at fault completely. Oh, the Chinese are angels. No, and I wrote the other day that, people say you can't trust the Chinese. They're always telling lies, and they have this special interest. I said, well, I don't know all the details of that, but I do know something about our CIA, you know. And if you say that you can believe everything the CIA tells you, then we really do have a problem. I bet the Kennedy family wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah. Well, as you say, when all the smoke clears and it turns out they have to revise way, way, way down, don't expect them to say we're sorry. They're going to, don't blame us. We were just trying to, as you say, keep you safe. And in the meantime, we may find out that there may be as many or more that have died as a consequence of the shutdown. I personally don't know anyone who's died from a coronavirus. I do know some things about suicide and some people that have had some serious medical conditions that have come up that are life-threatening because their doctor said we can't treat you. We've read about it and we know personally. So these kinds of things are coming up over and over and over, and they'll never have to answer for it. They'll never have to answer. Texas in 2018 had 10,000 flu deaths. It's in the Houston Chronicle. You can see the headline. We've had just over 10% of that this year, yet we've seen a massive lockdown. Can't go to the hospital, can't get your treatments, can't go to stores, shut down restaurants. It's a disaster.
Those are the statistics that will come out because I personally know, and it's pretty close to home, of people who didn't get proper medical care early on and the conditions deteriorated. And we've mentioned it before, they disrupted everything. How many people really's lives were saved with those two large military vessels? That they had one in California and one here. And they had 18 people show up, and the hospitals were empty, and they were laying off people because nobody would come. They terrorized everybody about going in. I mean, it's people will worry about the virus, but you know what a lot of people worry about is the bureaucracy coming and pestering you to death. And we got to take this test and this test and this test and check your family and everything else. It's that intimidation that really makes people, frightened about trying to live a normal life. So the people really, I wish I could do something more to try to alert people to what's going on. And I argue it's not that complicated. People should cherish their liberties and cherish their responsibility to take care of themselves and not trust the politicians. If you don't like what a couple people are doing, why put them in government? Why put Fauci in charge of all this? This is what we get.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Paul, thankfully our numbers are growing, and we're grateful that people are turning to us. It makes us want to work all the much harder early in the morning, trying to figure out and put a show together every day. But we want to keep in touch. Dr. Paul mentions, we talk about it a lot. There is a lot of censorship out there. People don't want to entertain opinions that conflict with their narratives, especially those that are pounded in their head by the mainstream media. So if you do want to follow us in a closer way, you could go to the Ron Paul Institute website, ronpaulinstitute.org, and then just go and subscribe, or /subscribe. Subscribe to our updates. Of course, we'll never give out your personal information, but we'll update you on things that are happening, the possibility of even having a conference, who knows, Dr. Paul, in the future at all. But these kinds of things, we want to keep in touch, so that's a good way to do it. Dr. Paul?
Very good. And I want to just close by making a comment about tracking, because I think tracking is a real issue. It's been around in history for a long, long time, but it's always a tool of dictators. So you can't take a society that pretends they protect individual liberty and introduce the notion that the government has to track you because they want to take good care of your health and make you safe. And right away, that's a danger point, and that is what's happening. They do the tracking, and they do this with a dictatorship. And no matter what war that the bureaucrats want to fight and the authoritarians want to fight, whether it's the military type or the social type, it's always a war. Because if you're against war, you're unpatriotic. Why is it that peace people who promote peace, are more likely to be labeled anti-American, and unpatriotic, and a mean, nasty person? I mean, that has to change, and it hasn't been that way all the time, and those issues are always split people in two different directions. But I still believe that there's a lot of people out there that would agree with it and say, yes, I'd like to have my life back. I'm sort of, hoping that this little episode we've had with coronavirus will wake up people and say, why are we doing this? It didn't help us. We're losing our liberties. It didn't save lives. And I think they're feeding us a lot of nonsense. And that's why these statistics are important. They lie to us about how many people have died from it. And later on, these figures will get much worse. They lied to you and said, oh, yeah, those numbers are getting better, but next month there's going to be a new virus. We have to come to the point where we shouldn't be intimidated with any whisper of fear. And because fear is always, and problems are always going to exist, but you have to ask the question, can free individuals handle these problems better than government bureaucrats who have special interests, who become powerful because they lie to the people? So I don't think the problem should be that overwhelming. I think the founders had it right. The dictatorship they were living under, they didn't like. They tried to give us a republic, but unfortunately, there's not much left of it. But as long as we can speak out and change people's minds one person at a time, which we're still able to do, we have to do it. And that's where we have to concentrate our efforts in trying to persuade people that liberty is far superior to the authoritarian principles of abuse of our lives. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.